You're listening to UNITEDWESTRIKE.com radio. Don't buy, don't comply. That's why. UNITEDWESTRIKE.com radio.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to United We Strike. This is our first marathon of 2011, and so far we've been to Germany and Switzerland. We've been to Ireland and the UK, and now we're back in the United States. And I'd like to introduce you now to a friend of ours, Charles Irwin from American Freedom Books, because it's always great to have a legal mind on our side and someone who really knows that what we're doing is very lawful. It may not be legal, but it's very lawful. And with that little tidbit, Charles Irwin, I'm going to let you explain that and introduce us to your guest, who's a big supporter of this program as well.
It's good to be here, Karen. Thank you for the introduction. This is Charles Irwin, and you're listening to United We Strike Radio. And my co-host today is Rick Adams from Republic Broadcasting. Rick, can you tell our listeners about your show?
Thank you, Charles. Well, as you know, you've been on my program. It is a weeknight program, 5 nights a week, Monday through Friday, and in the evening hours, 10 to midnight on Eastern Time, and that's 7 to 9 Pacific Time. Been doing it now for about 5 years or more, and we have really been very much on top of things. I think the cutting edge of the issues, which I must say that the issues we were speaking about 5, 6 years ago now are the same issues that we are speaking about today. And if anything, we have expanded quite a bit in the areas that we've been talking about in government, economics, politics, religion, the whole business of the academic world and the wars that are going on, both military and cultural, in the world today. So the program is really actually a rubber meets the road type of program now. We are gaining in listeners. We have attracted many new listeners, and like you at United We Strike, we have people all over the world calling in from Australia to Asia, Europe, South America, Mexico. People from everywhere are listening now, and that's very heartening to know that they're looking for something they're not getting from the propaganda media. Keeps telling us that everything is just okay, and we don't have to worry about a thing. We don't want to get extreme, we don't want to really get carried away with conspiracy theories. Just trust the masters, trust those in control, and everything will work out somehow, some way. Meanwhile, you just give us your freedoms and your liberties and be a good boy or girl, and we'll take care of the rest. So with all of this going on now, I think it is definitely a major change for us in this field at Republic Broadcasting Network, and we've seen it. We've seen the evidence of it. The home page is a great home page, too. We have a very good webmaster and does a great job of putting the feature articles up there every day, world news, national, the videos, the books that are for sale, that are available for people, and it's really up to date. So I must say, from many different viewpoints, that all in all, Republic Broadcasting Network has really done yeoman work in this regard, and I'm happy to be with them, be affiliated with them. As Karen knows, she's been on many times, and you, Charles, a few times as well, and quite a few people who are listening to my voice now have been on the program or on another program on Republic Broadcasting. So we're thankful for all of this, folks, and I thank you for having me on today with Karen and the rest here, and Charles, you, and the family of the United We Strike campaign. So thank you.
We're glad. We're very happy you could join us, and look forward to being on your show as often as you want us on.
Positively.
Speaking of the mainstream media and going over the same issues over and over again, have you been watching the mainstream media spectacle of the Tucson shootings here lately?
You know, I've only been giving it scant attention, Charles, because, quite frankly, it's repetitive, it's redundant, and it really is quite nauseating to watch the way it's being handled. That's my impression. What are yours?
I feel the same way. I mean, it's the government and mainstream media taking a crisis, loss of lives, and spinning it in some way to take more of our freedoms away. I mean, what they're going to try to do now is they're going to attack the Second Amendment, once again, and, add more gun laws to the 20,000 gun laws that are already on the books that Jared Loughner violated when he shot those people. And, it's just not what our country needs. All they're trying to do is enslave us by taking away the last rights that we have, which is the right to defend ourselves against them.
Yes,
is the way I see it.
I'm just thinking, have you been able to in the times that you've been on my program, you've been on with Karen, have you been able to get the kind of feedback that you feel is positive enough, and from people that listen to us that they want to know, they want to learn?
Yeah, I get people that are buying my books. I mean, they contact me over the phone. They contact me on my website, and I actually call them back and talk to them about issues that they have. And, they want advice, legal versus lawful advice, which I give them as well.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I get the same impression, when you've been on. We got a lot of feedback, and quite a number of people want to do something, but not just as individuals. They're trying to get like groups together to do this, to fight the system. And I know there are different people now from different walks of life. As you know, some of the people who agree with us on these issues on the Constitution and what has happened, many of them just feel that if we just abided by the original Constitution as it stands, that these problems would disappear. But you take a different approach to all of that at American Freedom Books, don't you?
Yeah, at American Freedom Books, I mean, I'd like our listeners to know that, there are actually two constitutions. Mm-hmm. And that's where the legal versus lawful tricks come into play. Right now, with the recent Tucson shooting, they're wanting to pass more legal gun control laws based on their corporate constitution. There's the Founding Fathers' lawful constitution, and there's the legal corporate constitution, and they trick us and take away our rights using their legal corporate constitution. Yes,
and that's something that most people have never heard of, as you know. When you first start talking about it, they probably think that you have two heads, and they think you're something from outer space. They sort of scoff at the idea. So how do you begin to try to get them to understand this? Where do you start? Do you start with a historical parameter, or do you just give them the legal briefing first?
I start historically, and I give them the legal briefing. But for this recent Tucson shooting, and what I would like our listeners to realize is that the Constitution, whether it be the lawful Constitution or the legal Constitution, is a document for government to follow. Our natural rights and freedoms are lay outside the Constitution. So the Second Amendment is basically a law for the government to follow. It means that they can't violate our natural rights to be armed. So, when attorneys and politicians and the mainstream media attack the Second Amendment, that's a legal trick. I mean, really, the laws governing whether we can be armed or not are outside the Second Amendment. It's a natural right from God in the universe. So man cannot dictate, gun laws or whether we can have spears or rocks or anything else to defend ourselves against the government and other criminals.
Yeah, that's right. That's a common thing. You know, I've been seeing in the recent week since this tragic incident, quite a few people prominently in the papers, media, in the commentary section particularly, advocating, just out and out advocating the abolition of or the repeal of the Second Amendment, and they've been cheered on by many, you know, as if to say, this is the way to go, folks. If we just had more laws and more controls, then we would have fewer incidents like this. And I think you and I both know that that's absolute nonsense. You know, quite the contrary. In fact, my reaction was, it's just too bad that more citizens of Arizona were not armed on that day, actually, and they weren't watchful and aware of this threat to them. Maybe they could have stopped it a lot faster than they did. And I think that would be the case.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, if a couple of people had been armed, you know, Lofton would have probably got off one shot, and then he would have been shot. I mean, and our government has disarmed us for a reason, and, you know, those people had to die, wait for this guy to reload, and then try and tackle him down and take his gun away from him when they should have had, when they have the Second Amendment and lawful natural right to be armed in the first place to defend themselves. When, I mean, these criminals walk up and they're really gun-free zones. You know, they know they're the only ones with a gun, and that's why that they commit these crimes. You know, you don't see a criminal walk into the police department and start shooting because everybody has guns. They go into places where nobody has guns and they commit these crimes.
Well, you know what's so funny about that? Actually, there have been a few incidents where criminals have gone into police departments, and they have done that. You know, but the thing is, the fact of the matter is that when they do, there are very few and far between incidents like that. But it goes to prove the fact also that if they do something like that, as they did in my city some time ago, they went in when there were few people on, and actually a police officer was killed. It happens to prove the brazenness of these criminal elements and why a populace that is more armed to the teeth and more self-protective is more apt to put a stop to this sort of thing. The police will tell you they can't protect individuals in society. They can't protect everyone. They can protect society, and what they do is basically provide a measure of security for society as a whole, but they cannot and they are not obligated to protect any individual in any community all the time. They just simply can't do it. So that's the thing, is the prisoners, the criminals, you know, in our society who sometimes wind up getting into prison, wind up being arrested and then convicted and sent to prison or what have you, they're in an environment which is supposed to be a gun-free environment, and yet they wind up, some of them, being killed. Some of them commit suicide. We've had that happen recently, too. So, you know, it's preposterous. These people who say they want a more perfect society, they want a utopia, and they want to outlaw all danger, to me, they're the dangerous ones, because what they're doing is proposing a police state in the name of a free state. And isn't that one of the things you're trying to expose?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what they're trying to do with all this Tucson shooting mainstream media hype. I mean, it's horrendous that these people, it's terrible that they lost their loved ones. It's terrible when anybody dies. But, you know, the reality is that guns are used to defend people from loss of life 2.5 million times a year. So, you know, our government and Obama and his administration and the Republicans as well, they would trade, you know, prey on an incident like this, disarm everyone, and have an extra 2.5 million people a year go through the grief of losing a loved one. I mean, guns are much more, are used more often to defend than they are to commit a crime. But they leave that out all the time in mainstream media, and they prey on these incidents, these horrendous incidents where you know, a 9-year-old is killed, and I'm sure in that 2.5 million a year where guns are saving lives, I'm sure there's children and families involved there as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely so, yeah. And what's happening is this continuing questioning of 9/11 and the questioning of this incident just the other day. You notice the media propaganda is that we somehow have become so uncivil that even our discussion of these things in such emotionally charged language somehow is what puts people like Mr. Loeffner over the edge, and that's what's responsible for people like that doing what they do. And, of course, there's no connection at all. But when they say that, what they're really saying is that we need to tighten the screws on free speech, on free inquiry. We need to make it so people do not question anything. They don't question their government. And when they do, and they become emotionally charged, then we've got to be able to find a way to punish that speech and that kind of name-calling and vitriol, as they call it, because otherwise it's going to lead to more incidents like this. Going back to the days of this country, days of the war against the Confederacy in the 1860s and so forth, and going back to the war for independence, it wasn't exactly a polite society. And you look at some of the debates and the battles that took place, even killing in the floor of the Congress, tell me today is somehow a unique experience and that we're on, some sort of an exception to the rule. I don't think so, Charles.
No, I don't either. Congress is, running scared now. And, I don't, it's not a good thing that a guy walked up and shot anybody, Representative Giffords, and killed Judge Roll, but most of our congressional members, in my opinion, if you read my book, they have betrayed us. They've committed treason. Summary execution with a gun isn't the right way to do it. They should have a trial, but most of these guys have committed treason, and they need to pay for their actions.
That's right. And they want, they do want to be free, many of these criminals, to do their dastardly deeds, because this is the nature of our society today. Freedom of expression on the one hand for them, but freedom for you to question and to question the 9/11 stories and the rest of government wars that have been conducted. Why, that's sort of forbidden now. I was reading one of the news stories, as a matter of fact, Charles, on the international front, and it's from the Pentagon to the private sector. This was an article in one of the, I believe it was one of the Boston papers. It was Brian Bender, the Globe, the Boston, maybe it was the Boston Globe, I don't know, which isn't certainly a reliable paper, but the article did say that in large numbers and with a few rules, retiring generals from the Pentagon are taking lucrative defense firm jobs. And it talks about how, the one particular general at the end of his 35-year career in the Air Force, name is General Gregory Speedy Martin, returned to his quarters to swap his dress uniform for Gulf attire. He was ready for his first tea time as a retired four-star general. And basically what happens is almost as soon as he closed the door behind him, his phone rang, and it was an executive of Northrop Grumman asking if he was interested in working for the manufacturer on the B-2 stealth bomber as a paid consultant. Well, a few weeks later, Martin received another call. This time it was the Pentagon asking him to join a top-secret Air Force study, a panel studying the future of the stealth aircraft technology. So, needless to say, he was in demand, and needless to say, he winds up getting another lucrative position even after he retires. So, it goes to prove, just this one incident among many, that war has become so profitable, and invading countries occupying them has become so profitable to these empire elite that it is totally, and to me, it is totally unconscionable that we have, as a nation, allowed our nation to steep into this abyss and go so low that we have to kill, maim, occupy, and destroy others for the simple reason that there is work to be had and there's money in it. And that's what it comes down to, you know, Charles? It comes down to simple profits.
Yeah, it's all about they're using our military to expand the United States corporation's empire. You know, we've got troops in 135 countries in the world. Yep. I mean, those troops aren't there to maintain democracy or give those people freedom. Those troops are there so the corporate United States can control those countries.
Exactly. That's exactly what they're doing, and still occupying Germany. We're still occupying Europe. You know, we've got bases all over the world. And, of course, it's breaking the budget now. America is broke. It's a major debtor nation. And the empire is crumbling.
Yeah. You know, on that Tucson shooting, you know, what I wonder, and I was thinking about this, I think both of us both agree that 9/11 was a false flag operation brought about by our government. But I wonder if representatives like Ms. Gifford was, you know, there was this health care bill repeal vote scheduled for the week of the shooting, and they had to cancel that. So I wonder if she was going to vote to repeal the bill, and a lot of other Democrats were going to get on board to repeal the bill. And maybe this was a message to the ones who were going to go against the establishment and try to repeal that health care bill. Maybe it was a false flag message from someone in government that wants that bill to stay in place. Now, I don't think they'd have the votes to repeal it anyway, but, you know, the Republicans are pretending that they're listening to the American people and at least talking about repealing the bill.
Yeah, that's the word, pretending. They're not doing much more than that. It's a con game, and people are beginning to realize that. You know, whenever I talk to people, they'll agree that, yeah, it's just more hot air, more rhetoric. And that's why people are getting the idea that they're not going to let the government take away their freedoms. Then an incident like this comes along, and all of a sudden they're on the defensive, you know, saying, well, we don't want to get too rash now. We don't want to get too upset now. Otherwise, we'll all be branded, you know, as nutcakes and nut jobs, you know, supposedly like this, fellow Jared Loughner. You know, we don't want that tag. We don't want that tar brush. And we don't want to be picked up and harassed as the FBI and other agencies are doing these days, going after people simply because of their websites or what they say, you know, what they do with regard to the government. That's the police state mentality right there. We've got on a worldwide scale problems that are so vast today, and yet what they're doing is they're deliberately pigeonholing Islam, and they're making this a war against these nations in the Middle East and beyond so that they can destroy our freedoms here at home, rather than the real enemies of the United States that are causing mischief all over the globe, threatening us from within. And, of course, they know that this is something that will pander to the average person, you know, the old gung-ho mindset, Charles, you know, let's become jingoistic again, and let's go back to war, and let's continue this because we want you to be safe, you know. Well, it silences the opposition. Since this incident just a week ago, you've heard people tone down their so-called rhetoric, you know. I've heard them. They've become more polite,
yeah.
Right? More civil, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm appalled by this whole spectacle, that memorial service, after the service, I think Obama's approval rating jumped up to 48%. I mean, it's ridiculous how they manipulate us with the mainstream media. I mean, what we at United We Strike want our listeners to realize, and on this issue especially, is that, the attorneys, the lawyers are incorrect when they talk about, the right to own guns is a Second Amendment issue. It is a natural right from God and the universe that we can own guns. These guys cannot pass a law prohibiting us from owning guns in the lawful system. Now they do it all the time under their legal system. All the attorneys in Congress, they're agents of the bar, which goes back to Great Britain, and so they're beholding to the bar before they're beholding to the United States of America or their people they represent. So, which is another problem that we have.
That's very true. Yeah. So this United We Strike campaign then is really multifaceted, I would say, and it brings people now across the world together in their own respective countries to see what is happening to them as well as what's happening to us, and we share all of that in common, don't we?
Yeah, we do. I mean, we've got different constitutions, different laws, but, God's laws and laws of the universe are all the same. I mean, those people have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness all over the world, just the same as we do. As far as gun ownership is concerned, they have a right to protect themselves from criminals in government and criminals on the street, just like we do. Whenever somebody wants to disarm you, the government will tell you that if one child, is accidentally killed with a gun, then we should get rid of all guns. But then they keep guns and their police state keeps guns, then all of a sudden we're slaves. I mean, that's, accidents happen. But, like the statistics say, 2.5 million people a year, their lives are saved by the use of a gun. So it's ludicrous to propose that because 6 people were killed last Saturday, that we should disarm this country and potentially kill 2.5 million people because criminals will not give up their guns.
That's absolutely true. But you wouldn't know it to hear the media bosses, would you?
No, you wouldn't.
Now, just the other night they had this on NBC there. Lion Williams had a segment going into the classrooms of Arizona, and they were asking the kids what they thought. And, of course, naturally, one of the very first segments was a segment in which one of the little children asked, why is it so much easier to buy a gun in Arizona than it is in a state like New York, a tight gun-controlled state? And, of course, they cut that quickly because the implication was that something like that is positive and good, and these tough gun control states have lower crime rates. Well, all you have to do is look at New York as a state and look at New York City and see how bad they are in terms of violence in which guns are used, and then look at the other states like Arizona. And you see the contrast, and you see those states in the South now where they have approved of a ban on gun control, or they have at least tried to, fend off the encroachment on the Second Amendment in their own states. And you notice the difference. You remember the Kennesaw, Georgia law maybe years ago, and the laws that would, a response to the Morton Grove handgun ban in Illinois, where they decided in Georgia they were going to say every man, able-bodied man and woman, should be actually in ownership of firearms. But they couldn't mandate that people get them, obviously. But the moral of the story was they wanted people to be well armed, and they encouraged people to go out and do that. And, of course, the crime rate was much lower there than it was in any of these other places, including in the Morton Grove area of Illinois.
Yeah, well, criminals, they don't want to be shot as they're robbing you, so, they want to attack people that are helpless as opposed to people that can defend themselves. I mean, that's just common sense.
Absolutely.
But as far as, I mean, the whole Second Amendment issue, I mean, I'll give you a story versus this, the McDonald versus Chicago, when the Supreme Court was deciding on whether the states, whether the Second Amendment applied to states and cities.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was, there was a legal trick being used there. They were using the Second Amendment, the legal Constitution versus the lawful Constitution in that regard. And, you know, all the attorneys that have been to law school and studied legal procedure, it flabbergasts me that none of these guys see it. You know, but, you know, I mentioned it in my book, and I mentioned it on my blog, but, you know, the trick they were using there, this whole McDonald versus Chicago, while that was going on, where they were deciding whether the Second Amendment applied to states and cities, a lot of the states were trying to use the 10th Amendment to the Bill of Rights to get some kind of sovereign states' rights. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
They're still going on. So if, you know, the Second Amendment and the 10th Amendment are both a part of the Bill of Rights,
yes,
and this whole McDonald versus Chicago was, what Supreme Court trial was to decide whether the Bill of Rights applies to states and cities, then how were the states applying for sovereign states' rights using the 10th Amendment, which both these amendments are part of the Bill of Rights? And the way they were doing that is, you know, they were trying to disarm us using the Second Amendment to their legal Constitution. Mm-hmm. But when the states wanted their rights, they were using the 10th Amendment to the lawful Constitution. So that's an example of them using the two different constitutions.
That's another example, yeah. You're right. And going back to even the Kelo decision and private property, going back even further than that, we had the process of urban renewal in America today, and that began this whole process, you know, in the late 40s and 50s, and the government was condemning private property for the benefit of private profiteers, so that it wasn't for the benefit of the people. It wasn't under proper eminent domain. It was actually for the benefit of others who were wealthy or connected to the entire system. And they were usually connected to the powerful global elite and the Council on Foreign Relations groups. These were the ones that were making out like bandits, condemning property and then managing to put up their own enterprises and to make a huge investment for themselves using public funds and access and so forth. So this was taking place in the 50s and 60s, really got underway, and it mushroomed. But look at the result it had, you know. Look at the Model Cities program they came up with in the 60s. All of this, the so-called war on poverty. Well, things got worse, and the reason was they were operating on a false premise. The premise was that if you change the environment in the inner city, people would somehow give up their slum personalities, and they would become decent, and you know, they would take care of themselves, and the people would clean up their own environment and come out of this ghetto-like environment. Well, in fact, just the opposite's true. It's the people that made the ghetto and the slums, not the other way around. So this is a typical, you know, humanistic, you know, Pavlovian, Freudian, Marxist concept of dialectic materialism, which is totally and absolutely false, based on a false premise. So, unfortunately, it's still embraced today in large circles, academic circles, as you know, Charles, where these professors continue to pontificate such doctrines that would change the landscape of our country to the point where it is unrecognizable. And what they're doing is trying to change human nature. You know, the new man, the new international man under communism? This is what they're trying for. Can't succeed, though.
Well, I mean, you know, based on the United States, you know, the corporate United States that we have, they're running the government as a corporation right now. And, you know, people are always talking about, you know, America's turning into a fascist, socialist, communistic country. Well, you know, they're not using the United States of America anymore in the Founding Fathers Constitution. You know, they're running America as a corporation. and a corporation can be a fascist, socialist, communistic entity because it's a corporation. It's not a nation. I mean, people need to realize this.
Hey, I want you to expand on that, too, if you could, and tell us more about the definition and the difference between what is legal or considered to be legal and what is truly lawful. Can you give us some more depth and more answers as to what you show in your own particular website, Charles?
Sure. Lawful laws, the Founding Fathers used common law as lawful law. It's the lawful law is the substance of law. Now, legal law is a form of the law that attorneys and members of the bar are using technically to rob us of our natural rights and freedoms with definition. In legal law, for instance, they might say that like the income tax says all persons and individuals have to file an income tax return. Well, what they don't tell you in legal law is that they've defined persons and individuals, to be other things than human beings. A definition of a person in legal law can be a corporation. And they've made us all corporations by the contracts we carry with the driver's license, Social Security card, all these documents that we think that we voluntarily sign our names to are actually contracts that make us corporations to pay for the debt of the corporate United States. When we look at the legal system versus lawful system, the legal system is a system of debt. The Founding Fathers' lawful system was not.
Let's be a little bit more now inquisitive here. For instance, say a young child comes into the world. Now, the first thing they get their birth certificate usually, right?
Correct.
And then with that birth certificate is all the pertinent information. Then they wind up getting a Social Security number, I guess. Is that how it works?
That's correct, yeah.
And all the others, so that when the time they're born into the world, already, before they're even aware of anything, they're little children, just toddlers, and already they're saddled with a burden of responsibility that, they never had anything to do with. And their parents had this responsibility thrust upon them. And the question is, how can people exercise volition under the natural law, under the lawful law, to extricate themselves and their unborn from this? How is it possible to do that, if so?
Well, the only thing I can see is education. It's all perception. We perceive that the legal system, because that's what the mainstream media tells us, that the legal system is correct. No one even thinks about the lawful system. The legal system is basically a way for the government to enslave us a little at a time without causing a revolt. They take away our rights little by little with contracts that they get us to voluntarily sign. They tell us and teach us in school that, you got to sign kid has to have a birth certificate. Kid has to have a Social Security number. Well, that's correct in the legal system, but we've let the attorneys and our government define what the legal system is and what these documents mean. Once which what I try to expose in my book is I expose all the legal tricks they use to enslave us. So hopefully, after we are aware of the legal tricks that are being used to enslave us, they won't work anymore.
Well, I know, and that's a good hope for, and that's certainly a wonderful goal to be attained. Do you know people personally that have come to you and done exactly that? That is not joined the system at all. Yeah,
I do. I don't participate in the system at all either.
Okay, good. So a number of people that are doing this now. No Social Security numbers, no bank accounts, none of that, right?
I know some. It's difficult to live in the world with.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
But I've had a lot of patriots call in and they say, there's rules in the United States Code that you can take yourself out of the system, and they want 300 million Americans to study the legal procedures so you can walk into a court and not have a lawyer and represent yourself. I mean, that's really not freedom if we have to do those kind of things. Why don't we instead, educate the people and force Congress to return our nation to us as a lawful nation and destroy the legal system instead of using a legal loophole in the legal system to get rights for yourself that it's not going to work for everybody.
Well, now, what about the approach of others who say that if you wait for Congress, you'll be waiting till hell freezes over, and you wait for politicians to do the right thing? You might as well just bury your head in the sand. What about the idea of implementing it ourselves through the courts? Is there a way that people are meeting with success in this country today in the court system? I mean, we've interviewed some on my program, as you know, some of them all over the country where they've been fighting legally, some with some success, some not so successful. But is that a way to do it, to actually implement it?
That's a way. That's a stopgap for short term. Most of the time you're going to lose because the legal system, what you're trying to do is you're trying to argue lawful laws in the legal system, and that doesn't work. I mean, the legal system is not set up to hear or even adhere to your lawful laws. It's a system of equity that's set up to deal with corporate legal fictions, which is what we are with our driver's license and Social Security numbers. So we're not real people. We're corporations of the United States Federal Corporation. We're little corporations, and they own us. So, when we step into legal courts, I mean, you have no rights. You only have privileges, and you can get a smart attorney or lawyer and win a few cases here and there, but I don't think that's the answer.
Okay. The other question then would be, as far as the concept that this is taking place in the United States, is it also something that is being used internationally in other countries? Do you know?
Well, I'm not that familiar with other countries, but yeah, there's other countries that are fighting the legal system in the same way that we are. And like I say, you can find a good attorney and you can find a knowledgeable jury, and you can win some cases. But most of the time, you got a treasonous judge sitting on the bench, and he's going to disallow most of the information that would prove your case, and instruct the jury not to even think about information that came out in the case, and you'll usually lose.
Unfortunately, I think you are right. Yeah, but not in all cases.
Not in all cases, but the whole thing's perception. I mean, once enough Americans know and realize that the whole thing's just a legal game, a legal dog and pony show, I mean, we can change our perceptions and change the world.
That would be an ideal, wouldn't it, huh, Charles?
Yeah, it would be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can hope and we can work toward those ideals, and I guess what we've had to do is settle for whatever we can get. But the compromise is the problem, is that whenever you, just like politicians, whenever you get into office, even a good politician, of course, or someone who's trying to be honest, turns out that he's going to have to join the system, or she's going to have to compromise along the way. And before you know it, all of this compromise has led to the total failure of everything they said they were going to do. It's just crazy.
Yeah, we can't depend on politicians to do it. The American people are going to have to do it. We're going to have to force whoever is representing us to do it or remove them from office.
Well,
but Karen wanted us to talk about the strike leading up to April 15th.
Right, that's coming up. Tell us a little bit more about that yourself, Charles.
Well, we're going to have a three-day strike on April 15th, And what people need to realize about April 15th is we're talking about legal versus lawful. I mean, when you file your income tax return, it is a legal income tax return. Income taxes are legal. Unfortunately, if you according to the Founding Fathers' Constitution, they're not lawful and they're unconstitutional. So when you pay your taxes, what you're doing is funding the beast that's enslaving you. All your income taxes, 99% of them go to the United States Federal Corporation, and the money goes to the International Monetary Fund. The Queen of England owns our Social Security system. I mean, it's just a whole corrupt system. And, you know, people need to realize the difference between lawful and legal. And, you know, you can go to my website and download free chapters of the book at AmericanFreedomBooks.com. The first free chapters will, especially the chapter on law, will explain the differences there.
Well, I think that's excellent, what you've just said, and what we're trying to accomplish. And in the time that we have to accomplish, you know, we've really come a long way, I guess, in the last couple of years. And Karen knows. Karen has done quite a bit of work in this field, trying to bring everybody together, different viewpoints, different parts of the world, different opinions, obviously. Not everybody is, you know, seeing eye to eye on everything. But the fact is that in these last couple of years or so, we've seen a great anger the part of callers and listeners to us, you know, showing that they're trying to withdraw from the system as much as possible. And, you know, just this past Christmas season, all the media hype, you know, was about how wonderful shoppers were going to go out and shop, and it looked like it wasn't as bleak as possible. And now we get the statistics come in, and it was bad. It was bad for merchants. Nowhere near what the media would have us believe, the hype and the malarkey. And that tells us something, that people are hurting. People have no choice now but to withdraw from all of their debt as quickly as they can, as much as they can. I don't expect them to get out of debt entirely. But the fact of the matter is that we, again, have been misinformed by the media moguls, and they've led us to believe that all is well. Just keep supporting Wall Street. Just keep supporting the criminals and the crooks, and you people on Main Street will be just fine. Well, it didn't work out that way, and I'm happy to say I was one of those who withdraw from the system and have done so in the last 2 years more than ever. You know, keeping my money, putting it aside for things that I need, not supporting these corporations, these criminals, these bankster gangsters. And I'm sure you've probably done the same thing.
I have done the same thing. I mean, it's you have to have the information that you need to be able to do that. I mean, you have it, and that's what we're all about at United We Strike, trying to give people the information they need to break away from this corrupt system. I mean, you know, for instance, on the income tax, April 15th coming up, you know, the Internal Revenue Service that our Congress and our governments allow on our shores is actually the Internal Revenue Service of Puerto Rico. I mean, it's a territorial organization. They shouldn't even be harassing us at all. But the Internal Revenue Service acts as the collection agency for the banks, you know, who are instituting the bankruptcy of the corporate United States, and we're all corporate legal fiction property of theirs. So they think that, so in the legal system, we have to file an income tax return. You know, if people knew the trick that's going on, which is what I try to expose in my book, you know, hopefully that would stop.
Yes, precisely. Well, I know that we're wending our way to the end of this hour, and we have more to come, folks, on the strike, United We Strike. And Karen has asked me to promote our network again, just to mention those of you who tuned in a little bit later. I'm Rick Adams. I call myself the Radio Avenger, and I do the program Rick Adams Uncensored on Republic Broadcasting Network. People can just go to it if they'd like to listen in to republicbroadcasting.org, and that's www.republicbroadcasting.org. And I'm on Monday through Friday nights from 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time now. so that if you wish to listen, you'd have to be there at that time. Remember, that's 9 Central and 7 p.m., by the way, on the West Coast. So we do get a lot of West Coast people who listen in. And, you know, Charles, you've been on a few times, and you will continue to come on and talk about what you're doing, trying to educate the public on law. Well, we try. You know, we try to bring people together, and also to separate the the men from the Boy Scouts, you know, because this is what it comes down to, is there are many who mean well and who certainly are trying to do their best, but when it comes to fighting this fight, some are just, they're in, you know, a little mythical world, and they think that we're just going to be able to lie back and just a few little letters to congressmen is going to change everything, and that doesn't work that way. They need to feel the pain. The Congress needs to feel the pain, but the people are feeling the pain now. The pain level has increased, and when that happens, the chorus grows, as we saw in this so-called Obamacare legislation. A widespread opposition to it and desire to overturn it. And that's the kind of thing that needs to multiply by tenfold. That's my view, Charles.
We need to keep our eye on the prize. I mean, you know, this whole Tucson shooting is a distraction. You know, Obama's approval rating goes up, and, you know, we think that our government officials are there to keep us safe when they're actually there to enslave us and have been enslaving us for over 100 years.
That's right.
So, and that's what we're about here at United We Strike, is keeping it real.
Yes. And also, at the time, we only have about 4.5 minutes left in this hour before we move on. I'd like to have you, Charles, tell us a little bit about your forum and the American Freedom Books. What is that all about for the people that still don't understand or just joined us?
Okay, well, I'm Charles Irwin, and I wrote a book called American Freedom, A Conversation with America for Change in the United States. And basically, it's a book that I wanted to expose every legal trick that our government uses to enslave us. I mean, they use legal tricks. You don't own property anymore. It means you think your car is yours. It's not. You think your house is yours. It's not. And my book explains how they use legal tricks to take those things away from you. And once you understand how the legal tricks were used, you can get them back, and you can force your government to the perception of lawful law over legal law. And, you know, my website is AmericanFreedomBooks.com. I'm also a core member of UnitedWeStrike.com, and I'll be doing an American Freedom Report on United We Strike Radio in the upcoming weeks or months, you know, going over these type of issues, legal versus lawful issues. So Americans have the ammunition they need to fight the legal system.
Good. That's very good. You heard it here, folks, on the United We Strike Radio Network, and this is the first of the new year, 2011, as we see the storm clouds gathering over us, the economic warfare that's being created against all of us worldwide now, and we need to expose it. We need to continue to make people independent of it, not dependent upon it. I think Karen is going to come back any moment now and sum up for us and make a transition here with our next host. If she's there, Karen, you can come in any time you'd like.
Well, thank you, Rick. You and Charles did an excellent job. What a great conversation that you have held here today. And I'm happy to say that we will have the archives, so folks who missed this can listen to it later. And we'll have to see what we can do about getting those to you, Rick, as well, so you can send that out to your email list. Excellent job. We are so honored to have you both on here. Rick Adams, you have certainly been most supportive for now going on, a year, maybe over a year.
Well, Karen, you know, when I cash those checks you send me, it means a lot. It puts a big smile on my face. So thank you.
Those FRNs. And thank you, too, Charles.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, it's great to have somebody who really can help us not get into trouble with, legal versus lawful. And it looks like we are getting ready to go for the break. Again, we've been with Charles from AmericanFreedomBooks.com and Rick Adams from RepublicBroadcasting.org. We've got much more coming up, folks. Stay tuned to the debut now of Under the Weather, which is just such a great title for issues like geoengineering and persistent jet contrails or chemtrails. Be back in a minute.
Thank you, Karen.
You're listening to UnitedWeStrike.com radio. Don't buy, don't comply. Ask why. UnitedWeStrike.com radio.